Today I want to show you the Jacobite succession, which is a line of British kings and queens that could theoretically have existed had history gone in a different direction. Some people claim that these individuals represent the true line of succession, and that if Scotland were ever to become independent, they should choose the current Jacobite heir as their king. The story begins with King James VI and First, who was the first monarch to rule over both England and Scotland. He has two numbers because he was the sixth King James of Scotland, but the first King James of England. He belonged to the House of Stuart. The House of Stuart replaced the House of Tudor in England when Queen Elizabeth I died without a direct heir. James was a descendant of an earlier Tudor monarch via a female line, so as the closest relative to Queen Elizabeth I, he became king. James was followed by his son, Charles I, but during the reign of Charles I, there was a civil war in England. A group of people led by Oliver Cromwell felt that the king was trying to become too powerful, so they fought against him, and Charles eventually lost his head. So England and Scotland were without a king for about 11 years. However, the British people eventually decided that they wanted the monarchy back, so the eldest son of Charles I was made king. He became Charles II, but ended up dying a little sooner than expected before having a legitimate son. So the throne passed to his younger brother, who became King James II and VII. This King James had two daughters from his first marriage, but he had married a second time to a Catholic individual, and he himself had converted to Catholicism. This was a bit of a concern because ever since Elizabeth I, England and Scotland had been Protestant, and most people liked it that way. But they weren't too worried because his eldest daughter, who was set to become queen after him, was Protestant, so they thought, well, this whole Catholic monarch thing won't last very long, so we don't really have to worry about it. But then what happened was James II and VII suddenly had a son with his second wife. In England and Scotland, a male child takes precedent over older female siblings. So this son was now set to become the king, and this would mean that there would probably be another Catholic king, and then maybe the monarchy would go back to being Catholic permanently. And a lot of the leaders didn't like that, so they invited these two individuals to take the throne instead. King James's eldest daughter had married her cousin William, who had become the Dutch Prince of Orange. In 1688, in what was known as the Glorious Revolution, William landed in England with an army, and James II and VII ended up running off to France. The following year, these two were named co-monarchs of both England and Scotland. So Queen Mary II was not just a queen consort, she was a reigning queen alongside her husband. James landed in Ireland at one point and tried to take back the throne, but his attempt was unsuccessful and he once again took refuge in France. His followers became known as Jacobites, Jacob being an alternate form of the name James. They considered him to be the legitimate king up until his death in 1701. William and Mary never had any children, so when they both died, the throne passed to Mary's younger sister Anne, who formally united England and Scotland as the Kingdom of Great Britain. But the Jacobites supported her younger half-brother, who had been raised in France. Like his father, his name was also James, so had he become king, he would have reigned as James III and VII. Now things got really complicated when Anne died. There were no close relatives to take the throne except, of course, for James. But Britain really wanted a Protestant monarch, and James refused to convert, so they had to look really far away in the family tree to find a Protestant successor. If we go all the way back to King James VI and First, you'll notice that he had a daughter named Elizabeth. That daughter had married a German prince, and they had a daughter named Sophia, who had also married a German prince. So Sophia was the closest Protestant heir to Queen Anne, and she was named as the successor. But she actually died just a little bit before Queen Anne, so therefore it was her son George, who was second cousin to Queen Anne, who became the next monarch. This established a new house, the House of Hanover, named after King George I's father. This gave new life to the Jacobite cause because George was seen by many as being a foreign German king, and therefore it was easy to argue that he was not the true king of Great Britain. So James used this opportunity to try and take back the throne. Attempts were made in 1715 and 1719, but both attempts failed. Interestingly, had James become king, he would have been one of the longest reigning monarchs in history. He lived until 1766 through the reigns of both King George II and into the reign of King George III. James had a son who was known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. He was also known as the Young Pretender, his father being the Old Pretender. The term pretender is used for someone who is claimed to be a monarch, but in actuality is not a monarch. Bonnie Prince Charlie led a Jacobite revolt in 1745 when his father was still alive, but that too failed. He did not have any children who were considered legitimate, so after he died, the succession moved to his younger brother, Henry, who had become a cardinal. He would have been Henry IX. But by the time Henry died in 1807, the House of Hanover was firmly established, and the Jacobite cause had pretty much fizzled out. So Cardinal Henry was the last male line descendant of the House of Stuart. However, there is still a way that we can get an alternative succession, and there are some people who feel that this alternative succession is in fact the legitimate one. This is because even though this branch died out, there is still another surviving branch that is more senior than the Sophia branch. If you look up here, you'll see that King Charles II and King James II had a younger sister named Princess Henrietta. The only reason why the throne didn't pass to her was because she had married a French nobleman who was Catholic. She had a daughter who married the King of Sardinia, Sardinia being part of what is today Italy. This line continued through several kings of Sardinia until we come to this king. So when Cardinal Henry died, King Charles Emmanuel IV of Sardinia was the next closest person in line to the British throne, according to the Jacobites. Coincidentally, if he had become the British monarch, he would have been King Charles IV in the UK as well. Now, at this point in the alternative succession, I should point out that if the Jacobites had been successful in taking back the throne, there likely would have been different marriages and different children, and therefore the succession wouldn't actually have looked like what we're going to see here. But this alternative succession is still useful for those who want to know who the Jacobite heir is today, in the hopes that that person might one day be placed on the throne of Scotland or even the United Kingdom. Charles Emmanuel did not leave heirs, so the throne of Sardinia passed to his younger brother Victor Emmanuel. Victor Emmanuel had only daughters, and therefore after him, the throne of Sardinia passed to a third brother. That's because in Italy, monarchs have to be male. But in the United Kingdom, a female is allowed to inherit the throne. Therefore, the Jacobite succession passed to the eldest daughter of King Victor Emmanuel, named Mary. She is considered by the Jacobites to have been Mary III. Even though the Jacobites didn't consider this Mary II to have been legitimate, they did consider Mary Queen of Scots to have been the rightful Queen of England, and this is why this Mary is known as Mary III in their succession. She married the Duke of Modena, and therefore the next in line would be their son, also Duke of Modena. When he died, the next surviving heir was his niece, Maria Theresa. She had married Prince Ludwig of Bavaria, who went on to become King Ludwig III, the last king of that country. So she is Queen Mary IV according to the Jacobite succession, but she was also queen consort of Bavaria. At this point, the succession passes to the House of Wittelsbach through her son, who was the crown prince of Bavaria, but never became king because the kingdom of Bavaria ceased to exist at the end of World War I. But according to this alternative succession, the crown prince was King Robert I and IV of the UK. He gets two numbers because there's never been a King Robert in England, but there had been 3 previous King Roberts in Scotland. He was followed by his son, Albert, and then his grandson, Franz, who is the current Duke of Bavaria and the current heir to the British throne, according to the Jacobites. He is currently 85 years old, and if he were ever to become the King of Scotland or the UK, he would be known as Francis II, because there was this previous Francis here. He never married and has no children, and therefore when he dies, his titles will likely pass to his younger brother Max. Max has only daughters, and therefore when he dies, his Bavarian titles will pass to a male second cousin, but the Jacobite succession, because it allows females, will continue through his eldest daughter, Sophie. Sophie is married to the current heir to the monarchy of Liechtenstein, and they have a son named Joseph. So Joseph will one day become both the reigning prince of Liechtenstein and the Jacobite heir. Interestingly, Joseph was born in the UK, the first person in the Jacobite succession to have been born in the UK since the Old Pretender. Now, of course, this line that we've been discussing is all theoretical. The actual succession proceeded very differently. The House of Hanover ended with Queen Victoria, and then was followed by the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. That house was later renamed Windsor and is the current reigning house in the United Kingdom. When Prince Charles becomes king, he will become Charles III. But there is a possibility that he will choose to reign as George VII instead, because monarchs get to choose their reigning names, and he might not want to go with Charles because of the fact that Charles I was the king who lost his head, and because Bonnie Prince Charlie was called Charles III by the Jacobites. Now, before we go, let me point out one more interesting fact. Charles II and James II both had illegitimate children, meaning that they were children of a mistress, not the queen. Illegitimate offspring were often given the name Fitzroy, or in this case, Fitzjames. Fitzroy meaning son of the king, or this meaning son of James. So we have an illegitimate son here and an illegitimate daughter here. And if we trace their descendants, we see that 2 of them ended up marrying, uniting the lines. And if we continue to trace some of their descendants, we end up coming to Lady Diana Spencer, first wife of Prince Charles and father of William and Harry. So this means that Prince William, who will one day become king, is actually a descendant of both King Charles II and King James II, albeit via illegitimate lines. He will be the first person in the Sophia succession to hold this distinction. So maybe that will make the Jacobites feel a little bit better. Now, I should point out that there is actually no serious debate in the United Kingdom today about the legitimacy of Queen Elizabeth. Interest in the Jacobite line still exists, but there have been no major attempts to put a Jacobite heir on the throne for well over 250 years. But it's still a very interesting what if. If you would like a copy of this chart, please note that I do not sell it as a poster, but you can download the electronic version for free over at my website, usefulcharts.com. I'll put the link in the description. Thanks for watching.